All right, so this is LIP call 8 for September 17th. So the agenda, let me just add a link to that in the chat in case people don't have that already available. So on the agenda today, we have 3 LIP candidates to talk about, LIP 36, 52, and 56, and then we'll close things out with a short open 5 to 10 minute open discussion period. So diving straight into the LIP candidates, the first candidate is LIP 36, Cumulative Earnings Claiming. This is the LIP for reducing the gas costs of claiming future earnings. So when this proposal is deployed, this would result in a more efficient earnings claiming process for token holders. I am the champion of this, but Nico has also been pushing forward on the spec and the implementation in the past couple weeks. So yeah, he's contributed a lot to this LIP and helped move it forward. I can give an update on this LIP, and the current status of this LIP is that it's in last call. And it's also currently, the implementation is currently being audited by QuantStamp. So a third-party security auditing firm that LivePeer Inc. is working with to review the changes in this LIP. Because the changes in this LIP are actually pretty non-trivial and complex. That introduces a new algorithm that is supposed to be more gas efficient and updates the old algorithm. Yeah, makes updates to the old algorithm as well. So given the complexity of changes, that's why the implementation is currently being audited, and the audit is currently set to complete tomorrow. And then from there, after the audit is completed, depending on the outcome, might have some updates to make to the implementation itself. But if all goes well and any necessary updates are added in the following days after tomorrow, then the current plan would be to transition this LIP into the proposed status and create a poll for it on Monday. So this timeline is also described in a blog post that was published earlier this week that documents the expected timeline for both this LIP and LIP 52, because those two LIPs actually have some dependencies with each other. We can talk about the LIP 52 timeline specifically maybe when we get to that topic, but the timeline for LIP 36 is highlighted in that blog post, and we would create a poll for it on Monday, and that would kick off in a roughly 9-day voting period, during which token holders will be able to vote on these changes. So that's the current status of this LIP, and as I mentioned, kind of the expected timeline that I just talked about is outlined in that blog post in writing. So yeah, that's where this LIP is at right now. Does anyone have any questions or comments about LIP 36, either the implementation, the proposal, or the timeline? All right, if not, then we can move on to LIP 52. So this is the earnings snapshot proposal, and Doug was the original champion of this, and Nico has also become the technical co-champion of this proposal, pushing forward the technical spec as well as the contract implementation and the client tooling implementation as well. So either Doug or Nico, do one of you want to talk about where this proposal is at right now?
I could just talk briefly about the timeline. So I think part of the thinking on the timeline was that the previous LIP 36 should be deployed before we can set the snapshot block to lock everyone's kind of accumulated stake in. And so we shared a timeline in which the LIP36 will be deployed. We'll start the poll for 52 that specifies the snapshot block, but the snapshot may not be immediately available. It'll likely be available a couple days later for review, which is kind of a buffer time to complete the implementation and confirm and review and test the snapshot as well. So I think that timeline's communicated in the blog post. People should take a look at that if they have questions. I think the target is, if this is approved, it could be live by October 7th.
Cool, thanks, Doug. In terms of a technical update, I guess the contracts are pretty much finished and they're up for review. We had a first pass review on it. Nothing major in terms of things going bad there, so everything seems pretty okay. The client-side tooling, there will be a CLI tool that allows you to not only verify the generated snapshot, but also verify your proof for your earnings that you are owed, as well as, if you deem necessary, generate the entire tree yourself, so you can verify that as well. And there will also be features added to the Explorer that kind of seamlessly integrates this snapshot claiming into the Explorer. So with this proposal, the max claim rounds thing that you might have seen in the Explorer goes away. So now you will just automatically be able to claim earnings whenever you unstake or stake new tokens or withdraw fees. And in case you haven't claimed from the snapshot yet, these actions will actually call that logic under the hood as well. So from a user's perspective, nothing really changes, except you don't have to deal with those max claim rounds anymore.
Right, so I think you alluded to this, but interesting implication that might be worth emphasizing is that this notion of earnings claiming will actually disappear for users after both LIP36 and LIP52, if they're both deployed. While it's still a technical concept under the hood, from a user's perspective, they don't really need to know about this as like an action they need to take anymore, correct?
Yeah, that's entirely correct. And I think that's pretty much a good thing. The one thing I would emphasize is that we should perhaps reiterate in our communication or in some blog post that you don't have to manually claim earnings, because some users will probably still have questions where this kind of logic went. And that we should reiterate that rewards automatically compound and that you can withdraw your fees without having to claim earnings and stuff like that. So just some communication around that might be useful for end users.
Right, so with the Explorer in particular, those types of actions would no longer be supported because they're unnecessary, but it could be helpful to briefly explain why those actions are no longer supported by the Explorer, just in case someone thinks something is going wrong, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. I think one thing that Doug mentioned that was highlighted in the blog post is that in the timeline for this LIP, typically the voting period, a typical voting period is roughly 9 days, and it's noted in the blog post that due to the dependency between LIP36 and LIP52, the snapshot for that would be required for LIP52 would not be made available until a couple days into the voting period for LIP52. And there's an explanation for why that's the case in the blog post, but just curious if anyone on the call has any thoughts or comments that they'd like to make or questions about that timeline. Okay. If no questions, no problem. I think the thing to emphasize here is that it will very much be the case that the snapshot will be reviewable by community members voting on LIP 52 during the voting period. And that's one of the most important criteria for this proposal, that it introduces this snapshot, but anyone can verify that that snapshot is correct. And that should be an input into their decision when they actually vote in the poll. So the CLI tool should make that very easy for them, and they can very easily check that the snapshot is correct and then vote accordingly. So there very much will still be plenty of time to actually do that review and then vote once the snapshot is made available. All right, any other comments, thoughts, or questions about LIP 52? Cool. If not, yeah, I think anyone that's either watching this after the fact or anyone on the call that wants to get more familiar with the proposed details of the timeline should check out the blog post that has been mentioned a few times and that has been linked in Discord, that should contain all the pertinent information about what to expect in the next couple weeks as these LIPs start to roll out to polls as well as potentially deployment. The last candidate here is LIP 56, so a little bit removed from the previous two. And this is the reward period LIP that I originally created and I'm the champion of. So the main intent for this LIP is to try to decrease the cost of reward distribution for orchestrators. So more specifically, the cost of calling reward. And the high level design idea for this LIP is that rather than orchestrators calling reward every round, they would call reward every reward period number of rounds, where the reward period in the LIP is described as 7 rounds. So an orchestrator would only need to call reward on that 7th round. And as a result, the effective per round transaction costs incurred by that orchestrator would be divided by 7. So a pretty decent decrease in the overall cost burden for an orchestrator. So since the last LIP call, when this draft was originally produced and talked about, there's been a round of feedback on the LIP, and I think most of this feedback has come from Doug and Nico, and a lot of this feedback is around some of the mechanics under the hood. So I think less about the high level idea of introducing a reward period, but more about like the lower level implications. So this is really affected by how we implement the reward period. Unfortunately, I have not had the time to follow up all that much with this LIP, but I can describe some of the things that after reviewing the feedback, I'm currently considering. And just as a refresher, the current suggested implementation for that proposal is that we would continue minting the inflationary tokens in each round of a reward period. So the total supply of LPT would increase in each round, but that LPT wouldn't be distributed until the reward round. So at the end of that 7-round period. In the feedback, there are some questions about, I won't highlight all of them, but some of the ones that stand out to me are, well, are the tokens minted in a staked state, or are they minted in an unstaked state? So if the tokens are minted in an unstaked state, this has an interesting implication, which is you would see the participation rate decreasing each round unless more people are staking their, more delegators come in and stake their tokens. On the other hand, if the tokens are minted in a staked state, there are some questions around how you would implement this cleanly and safely. So that's a type of question that has popped up around the current design. Another theme in the feedback has been today, when orchestrators call reward theorying around, if they miss a reward call, those tokens just aren't minted at all. So they never existed in the first place. So that's actually a quite clean way to handle this. You don't have to deal with unaccounted for tokens. But in the proposed implementation in LIP56, if we're minting the tokens each round and only distributing them in the reward round, well, if an orchestrator misses a reward call in the reward round, you end up with these unaccounted for tokens. So there's been some discussion around what you do with those unaccounted for tokens. Do you just track them separately? Maybe they end up being used as a part of like treasury, or they end up being burned. But there's questions around what you do with it, or maybe you just don't do anything with it just quite yet, and those tokens are tracked for some unspecified purpose that can be determined via governance later on. So these are some of, I think, the major questions that have popped up since this proposal first went out. And I'll pause there before talking about, after reviewing the feedback, some of the things that I've been considering, in case anyone wants to add on to any of those pieces of feedback or has any comments or questions immediately about those themes. Cool. If not, then I can talk a little bit about some of the things that I've been considering, taking that feedback into account. And the main idea I've been playing around with is, right now we have this minter contract where the minter contract needs to also manage the inflation rate policy. And I think one of the main things that the current implementation suggested for this LIP tries to solve for is the fact that the inflation rate is on a per round basis. So if you have a reward round that only happens every 7 rounds, then if you want to stay true to that per round inflation rate, then you need to somehow determine how many tokens should be minted for that reward period. And this is tricky because right now the minter that we have manages the inflation rate policy, and the inflation rate is defined as a variable which is on a per round basis. So if we could change that by upgrading the minter, similar to what we did for LIP40, but that's a little inconvenient, right? Because upgrading the minter also serves a second purpose, which is it's like the bank of the contract system. It holds all this LPT and it holds all this ETH. So we really want to, it'd be nice and ideal to avoid upgrading the minter every single time you had to support something that's inflation rate based, an inflation rate based change, such as this one. So an idea that I was playing around with was, if it's acceptable to do a minter upgrade, then is there a way to do the minter upgrade such that further changes to the inflation rate model become substantially easier, such that they don't also need to kind of require a migration of value from the minter. So it separates the minter's purpose away from just being it makes the minter just a bank instead of also the inflation rate manager. And then it moves the inflation rate management stuff to a separate contract, which can be updated standalone. So what this would look like is that we would still need to upgrade the minter this one more time, but it separates the functionality out. And as a result, in this new, let's call it inflation rate manager, for the purposes of this reward period, it might have logic that makes it easier to determine, oh, how many tokens should have been minted in the reward round. And then those are the tokens that are minted in the reward round. And the minter just asks the inflation rate manager oh, how many tokens can people actually mint right now? And then in the future, this would also make it easier to perhaps make changes to the inflation rate schedule if that was something that was actually deemed to be necessary. So that was a topic of conversation for LIP 40, and I don't think the community really wanted to make any schedule changes, but if you had to make a schedule change, that would be substantially less complex and less onerous because you just do an update to the inflation rate manager as opposed to, oh, we have to migrate all this value from the minter in order to support this. So yeah, that's the basic gist of what I've been considering. So I haven't had as much time to follow up on this LIP as I otherwise would like to, but that's something that I've been toying around with and wanted to share with the group, and that's kind of my only update for now in case anyone has any immediate reactions to kind of that rough idea.
Sounds like a good idea that can add some flexibility in the future. Would you consider bundling that into this particular LIP or just submitting it separately?
I think there might be, it might make sense to define this in its own proposal, but I think it would be a part, I would have it be a part of this reward period change. Because the main reason that I'm thinking about this is I think it would make something like a reward period a lot easier to deal with, and it might address some of the kind of open questions that have come up in the feedback that's come in thus far, but it also has this positive side effect, which is more flexibility around these types of changes going forward. Obviously, devil is in the details, so we need to outline all of this. So that's why I mentioned.
Yeah, my reaction to that is just that sounds good, but the other trade-off is just additional time and complexity to implement, review, test, push through another LIP with a non-trivial code change when we're trying to get this kind of gas cost relief to the orchestrators in short order.
Yeah, definitely. This is a bit preemptive, but I think my best guess right now is that doing something like this might actually be simpler and quicker than the changes that would be necessary, at least with the current implementation described in the LIP. So that's kind of like the main reason that I'd consider this, because I agree that like we want to provide the gas relief sooner rather than later. It just happens to be the fact that this would also have positive side effects moving forward. Cool. If no one else has any immediate thoughts on this, I think the next steps here are I'd like to follow up on this some more, and then I'll actually follow up in the discussion thread with a more detailed and thorough write-up with some of the impacts and like maybe second order effects of this laid out. And then if I'm still feeling good about it, might update the LIP accordingly and try to press forward from there. So I think those are the next steps, taking this try to incorporate this second pass design idea into the LIP. And this is still a draft, so this is still earlier on than 36 and 52. Cool, so that's the last LIP candidate, and just as a review, for LIP 36 and 52, the next steps for both of those are, for 36, we're finishing up the security audit, starting the poll soon thereafter, and for LIP 52, we're working on completing the client tooling, finalizing the contract code, and then the poll would be started soon after the LIP 36 poll ends. And that's all described in the earnings claiming gas cost reductions blog post. All right. So those are the next steps that we have across all of our LIP candidates. That's it for the candidates for this call. If there's nothing else, we have an open discussion period. So if anyone has anything that they want to bring up for next time or want to discuss briefly, we can touch on it and then close out the call from there. So anyone have anything on their mind with regards to LIPs that they want to flag for next time?
I think we're in the implementation and rollout period of these big ones we've been pushing for a while. So let's stay focused, get them through, and then hopefully we'll be in a good place to revisit some of the other ideas afterwards.
Yep, agreed.
Great work, Yanin.
Thanks, Gavin. Yeah, the product of a lot of hard work from people on the team, and so looking forward to getting it rolled out.
Just have to pass some votes first.
Just have to pass some votes first, yes. Cool. All right, in that case, I think this is a short one. We can close out the call early. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the next call in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.